Hey everybody, before we get started, I want to say thank you to a few very important people. First of all, I want to thank Victoria Zeller for the initial research on the case that I cover today. And I want to send a special thank you to Jackie Moranty, the host and producer of Lucky Charms Unplugged, as well as Cause of Death, Epidemiology Throughout History. Jackie has done a tremendous amount of research on the case that I covered. She also helped to write the script. So thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Victoria. Also want to thank the people that have supported me this month. Deanna signed up to be a patron. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank Molly for becoming a patron at the $10 a month level. Your support means everything to me. It means I can continue producing this show, and I am so very grateful for that. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. True Consequences is a true crime and mystery podcast with stories based in New Mexico and the American Desert Southwest. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of True Consequences podcast. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin, and I am joined by the extra special, super awesome, amazing, incredible Lydia.
Me?
You.
That was about me?
This is the first time I haven't, talked shit about you as I introduce you.
Something's off. Who are you and what have you done with Eric?
You know, Lydia, I actually wanted to talk about my mental health struggles for my listeners because I feel like it's important for people to know that it's okay to talk about this stuff.
Totally. Especially a man talking about mental health.
Yeah. It's something that, is hard to talk about. It's something that's can be embarrassing, I think, at times because you feel like you should be able to manage your mental health on your own, but it's not always possible. And I think doing this show, as much as it's fulfilling for me, as much as it's been healing in a lot of ways, it's also drained me emotionally and had a pretty severe bout with depression over the last couple of weeks. I talked about it a little bit on my personal Facebook page, and I just wanted to share that with my listeners so that they know that it's pretty common for people to struggle with mental health issues. I think it happens to more people than we think because people don't talk about it because of the stigma around it. I am getting help. I'm okay. I'm not 100% okay, but I'm getting there. A therapist, I've got a psychiatrist, I've got a lot of people around me that love and support me, and it's going to be okay. I just might need to take some time and take a little mid-season break from the podcast and go get out into nature. But I wanted to have a conversation, especially with you, because I know that you have your MSW and your experience with these kinds of things. So that's how I wanted to start the show. And I think it's something that we've kind of been threading through as we've been talking with our last episode about spree killers. And now we're talking about spree killers again. I think mental health is very much on top of mind as we're talking about these things, but also in our personal lives.
And especially in, we're 2021, we're still dealing with COVID. There has been so much of a psychological impact on so many people. I mean, everyone's just doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, I'm not doing a very good job right now. I need help.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I hope that other people will feel comfortable sharing that too.
Yeah.
And getting help, because there's tons of resources out there. And I'm sure people can find them easily. Maybe you can post some. And it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to do, I think, sometimes, especially for somebody like me who is constantly giving and trying to help people. It's hard for me to recognize when I'm drowning, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, New Mexico, where we've known for a lot of machismo culture. And I think sometimes you exude that, where you are used to taking the reins and being the leader. And so I think it's just that much more important that you are demonstrating that it's okay to say, hey, I'm not okay.
Yeah. 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 So, and then the other thing is, I think I'm covering a lot of kid cases this season, and that has been, of course, hard for me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I probably should have thought about that before when I was planning out but I have at least 5 child abuse cases that I'm covering this season, and it's taking a toll.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the trauma that you experienced with losing your baby brother in such a horrific way. And
I know that you are doing good work by shedding light on these cases, but I am glad that you recognize that you might have to take a break because you can only do so much.
Yeah, it's hard, but necessary. So I need to take care of me before I can take care of other people. I think that's the message that I have for myself, and that my new therapist has told me, like, you have to charge yourself back up if you're going to continuously do this, because I can't keep helping people when I'm completely depleted. So,
right.
So that is probably coming in the near future. You might get a week or two of no True Consequences episodes, so just be prepared for that. But I will be back. I am still working on all these episodes, and lots of stuff coming here in the near future. So that's enough blabbing about myself. A couple reminders. If you want to learn more about True Consequences, go to trueconsequences.com. If you want to support the show financially, you can go to patreon.com/trueconsequences or ko-fi/trueconsequences. All right. So as I mentioned before, Lydia, we are talking about spree killers again. These are two cases that were on my list for this season, and I had them separated, but then after we did the last episode, I decided that I wanted to kind of revisit that same idea, that same topic, and talk through a couple of other cases that are somewhat related. So this is going to be Spree Killers Part 2. So I'm going to talk to you, Lydia, about Damien Herrera. Have you heard of him?
I have not.
Okay. If you look at his Facebook page, he is a smiling young man. He seems to have a lot of promise. He talks about going hunting, riding dirt bikes, going fishing, spending time with his family. He liked to be around a bonfire with his family, telling stories. He talks about teaching his brother to drive a stick shift, hiking with his friends, and he likes to post a lot of music. So when you think about social media and this kind of persona that people present, it doesn't always match who they actually are. And I would even say for me, the persona I present on social media isn't really the real Eric, right? Like, people like you know me, you know who I am, and I might be posting memes, but then I also might be like super depressed in my bed, right? And people might think that I'm okay because it looks like that from outside. So I think it's important to think about that when you're looking at people's social media, and especially if you have a hard time with comparing yourself to others and what their lives are. It's kind of artificial a lot of times, I think.
Oh, totally.
So while these are the upside of his Facebook, there's also a darker side. Sometimes his posts can be short sentences talking about having bad days, sleepless nights, negative thoughts. Pictures from 2011 show him smiling and participating in activities that he loved. But as you go further through his timeline, you start to see a tired and stressed and withdrawn young man. So he starts to change. A post from February 2015 states, "I'm considered a certified genius stuck in a world full of egotism and blank heads. Infinite wisdom they can't comprehend. This stud forever young wizard."
How old was he at the time of these posts?
After the events on June 15, 2017, his sisters would say that he had been increasingly depressed and had complained of hearing voices in his head. They would also say that he had talked about killing people, quote, just for fun. They would go on to tell law enforcement that the family tried to intervene and seek help from mental health professionals. Damien was 21 at the time and a student at the University of New Mexico in Taos. He was majoring in biomedical engineering. He had recently lost his job at the Ojo Caliente Mineral Springs and Resort, and at the time he had no previous criminal record other than minor traffic violations. So on June 15th, 2017, at approximately 3:30 p.m., police were called to State Road 111, Private Drive No. 1 in La Madera, New Mexico, regarding a shooting that had taken place there. And when they arrived, they found Max Trujillo Sr., 55 years old, Brendan Herrera, 20 years old, and Brenda Gallegos, 49. They had all been shot. Max and Brendan were both dead at the scene, and Brenda would die in the hospital the next day. The shooter was identified as Damien Herrera. His sister Carissa witnessed the shooting.
I mean, it's interesting that you talk about at around this age, he starts hearing voices. That's really actually pretty common as emergent psychosis. That's usually around the age, 18 to 26. It's very common to start seeing episodes of emergent psychosis in that age group.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And that could turn into a diagnosis that could be very broad, or it could be manifestations of schizophrenia.
Right.
And in our last episode, we talked about, what are those, hearing voices and paranoia.
Yeah. It's troubling, to think about the fact that his family, to know that his family tried to get help and tried to intervene, and still he ends up...
Very similar again to our last episode. Where,
John Hyde.
Yeah, John Hyde. I mean, everyone around him was doing the best that they could. And I don't want to make excuses for this young man's actions by saying, well, this is the product of mental illness. But I think it says a lot that how serious mental illness can be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Carissa told police that she was in the house when she heard Damien arguing with her father. Damien wanted to borrow a pickup for his appointment, but his father told him no. When Carissa looked out the window, she saw Damien shoot Max 5 times in the chest, and then watched as her mother and brother ran out of the house to help her father. Her brother Brendan tried to get the gun away from Damien, while her mother Brenda rushed to her father to see if she could help him. Damien forced Brendan to his knees and then shot him once in the neck. Brenda then went to Brendan to see if she could help him. Brenda turned to Damien and asked why was he doing this and begged him not to shoot her, but he only reloaded the gun and shot her once in the back of the head as she knelt over Brendan's body. So he then stole their car. He grabbed guns out of the house, took a credit card, and took off. After leaving the scene, he headed to Tres Piedras, where he ran out of gas. Along the way, he was offered a ride by Michael Kite, a 61-year-old recently retired anthropologist who worked for the Carson National Forest. He lived in that area. It's unknown why Michael took Damien to his home, but when they arrived there, so Michael took Damien to Michael's home, not to Damien's home. When they arrived there, Damien shot Michael 5 times in the back with the same revolver that he had taken from his home, and then he stole Michael's Chevy pickup. A 911 call was made by Michael's wife at around 5:45 p.m. after she found him dead of gunshot wounds in the driveway of their home. The police issued a be on the lookout for Damien and the Chevy pickup. Damien then headed north to Antonito, Colorado, and then west to Cumbre Pass and south to Chama, New Mexico. He continued south to Tierra Amarilla and then on to Abeyta. This round trip is approximately 185 miles, and it should have been enough time and distance to reflect on what he had done and reconsider what he should do next, but instead he reloaded the revolver. And at approximately 8:15 that night, Herrera stopped at Bode's General Store in Abeyta. He fueled up the truck using the credit card that he had stolen from his stepfather, and as he was driving away, he shot Manuel Serrano 3 times in the back as he was filling his tank with gas. Manuel Serrano, 59 years old, died of his injuries at the scene.
So he had no interaction with him whatsoever, was just there filling up his car.
Damien then fled south on Highway 84 in the pickup that he had stolen from Michael. Police located the vehicle with Herrera driving, and a chase ensued, and there's a video on YouTube of lapel camera of the police chasing him down and when they interact with him. Herrera was driving way too fast for the curvy mountain roads. He crossed over the yellow line into oncoming traffic in order to avoid hitting a state patrol vehicle that was coming from the other direction. He overcorrected and his truck crashed into a tree. So he jumps out of the truck and starts running towards the police. He attacked one officer and attempted to take the police officer's firearm. The service revolver discharged, but no one was harmed. Herrera was tased, tackled, and taken into custody. If you watch that video, it's pretty shocking.
I mean, it's like so animalistic, like you're cornering an injured animal.
Yeah.
And that's when they're most violent.
Yeah. It took, I think, 3 or 4 officers to subdue him because he was just rampaging. He was, yeah. And the accident is shown on that video as well. It's pretty dramatic. If you can't handle scenes like that, I recommend not looking it up. It can be kind of shocking to see it.
And that's crazy that he was able to get out of the vehicle after hitting a tree going that fast. Mm-hmm. I mean, that must have been pure adrenaline.
During this entire incident, Damien yelled, "I didn't do anything," over and over again. While he was being transported by police, he told officers how Max had refused to let him borrow the truck, and he claimed that he shot Max in self-defense for not allowing him to take the truck. The officer replied to him, "That's not self-defense." He was taken to Rio Arriba County Jail and would remain in custody until he went to trial. While in county jail, Damien attempted to escape by telling a guard that his toilet wasn't working. When the guard opened the cell to check on the toilet, Damien slipped out of the cell and locked the guard inside. Again, there's another YouTube video of footage from this, and it's also very violent and very shocking. So what he does next is he hides behind a counter. When the other guards respond to the call that the guard made while he was locked in the cell, Damien jumped from behind the counter and attacked one of the two responding guards with a flashlight and just starts beating him. And he started punching everybody until a third guard tased him. He was deemed too aggressive for county jail and was remanded to the New Mexico State prison system.
I mean, he's like I would assume like a young, fit guy that he's able to overpower so many people.
Yeah. Definitely young, definitely fit, definitely strong, and also probably running on pure adrenaline again at this point. You know, his trial had been postponed several times because the court was trying to determine if he was competent mentally to stand trial. He did receive treatment at the New Mexico Behavioral Institute in Las Vegas for several months,
where John Hyde is.
He was deemed fit to stand trial in January of 2020, but of course, due to COVID, there were several delays in the trial.
This is very recent.
Yep. His trial began on July 28th, 2021. During the trial, Cassie Herrera, Damien's sister, described that day. She told the court about hearing the conversation between her stepfather and her brother. She described the struggle for the gun and seeing Brendan on his knees. She recounted her mother's last words to Damien and talked about how Brenda had begged him not to shoot her. She described Damien reloading the .38 revolver and shooting her mother. She then talked about how she wanted to go with her mother while EMTs were working to save her life. Damien spoke on his own behalf in court. He claimed self-defense in the shooting of Max Trujillo, and he showed no remorse for any of the victims except his mother. The jury began deliberating on August 11th. Two issues came up during deliberations. One of them was that jurors requested to hear testimony from Damien's sister about the shooting of her brother, father, and mother repeated. The other was that the jury asked for clarification between a deliberate killing and an impulsive killing. Instructions were given to the jury, and they came back with a verdict on August 13th. Damien Herrera was found guilty on 4 counts of murder in the deaths of Max Trujillo Sr., Brenda Gallegos, Brendan Herrera, Manuel Serrano, and he faces 4 life sentences for those murder charges, which would be 120 years in New Mexico. The jury of 6 men and 6 women also convicted Herrera of aggravated fleeing from a police officer, possession of a stolen vehicle, resisting an officer, attempting to disarm an officer, assaulting a peace officer, larceny of a firearm, and credit card theft. And the judge will determine whether these sentences will be served consecutively or concurrently. There's been no sentencing date scheduled yet. The trial for the murder of Michael Kite has not yet been scheduled. This will take place likely in Taos County. Herrera will stand trial for first-degree murder of Michael Kite and for the unlawful taking of a motor vehicle for the theft of his pickup. In an interview with the Santa Fe New Mexican, Andrea Kite expressed concern that justice would not be served for her husband. She worries every single day that there will be no trial for Michael and that Damien will plead out, or worse, that the courts will decide that since Damien has already been convicted for the murders of Max, Brendan, Brenda, and Manuel, he won't be convicted for Michael's murder.
I mean, I'm sure that's like a huge piece of the closure aspect, I would imagine. Like knowing, like, of course, he's not going to be alive 149 years from now.
Right.
But just making him stand there and being told you're responsible for this and you're being held accountable.
Yeah, I think, part of the whole victim's rights, if you look at that, it's being able to face the person and confront them for what they've done to you and what they've taken from you, and to not have that day in court. Like, I know how that feels. It's not a very good feeling. It feels like, for me, it felt like being kind of like gaslit in a lot of ways.
Like further silencing an already silenced life.
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling. So she was quoted in the Santa Fe New Mexican saying, quote, I wanted to hear it said to him. I wanted it to be told to him in court, on record. No mention of first-degree murder or unlawfully taking of a motor vehicle resulting in the loss of life. My greatest fear is that when the time comes for justice to be had for Michael, Taos County will not pursue it. I'm afraid they will make a plea agreement. I want a trial. I want justice for Michael, for our children and grandchildren. End quote. The 5 victims of this horrible tragedy were wonderful people that should be remembered. Their photos reflect happiness and joy. They are people that everyone would want to know. They had families and friends, and they were loved. Max Trujillo Sr. is remembered as a great father, a comedian, and a good all-around man. He loved doing whatever it was with his wife as long as she was happy. He was a legendary iron worker in California and built the home in La Madera where his family lived. His nickname was Mad Max, and he was respected and loved by everyone in his life. Brenda Gallegos loved being a grandma. She loved being with her grandkids and her family. She enjoyed being outdoors, loved picking piñón, and enjoyed camping, fishing, and hunting. She truly loved everything she did. Her family remembers that she made endless tortillas and always took care of everyone. It makes me sad. It reminds me of my grandma,
Yeah.
Brendan Herrera was full of life. He was generous and loved everyone. He was described as a man of integrity. He was always on time and ready for hard work and loved his dog, Little Miss Ruby. He had a bright smile and would brighten your day. Michael Kite was known to family and friends and colleagues as a gentle, private soul. Michael married the love of his life, Andrea Harris, on November 1st, 1981 in Portales. He received his Master's of Arts in Anthropology from Eastern New Mexico University, and archaeology was one of his great passions of his life. He performed his scientific discoveries with unique insight and ethical integrity. He provided many contributions to archaeology, but his most impactful being his efforts to protect the Weather Moon Draw Rock Art Complex, an archaeological district in southern Montana, home to the largest concentration of polychrome painted prehistoric art known on the northern plains. Michael was also a talented artist. His art was based in depictions of his favorite Native American stories. His knowledge of history and ability to see into the past allowed him to create pieces in pen and ink, acrylics, ceramics, and bronze. And finally, Manuel Serrano was a generous and caring man, always quick to lend a helping hand. He was notorious for his good-natured humor, always teasing and joking with friends and family. He loved and enjoyed life to the fullest, cherishing the simple things. He had married his wife Kathy for 38 years. They had 2 daughters together. His greatest joys of all were his grandchildren. Lucas Martinez was his first grandson, his querido, his pride and joy. Lucas shared a very special bond with Manuel. He was later blessed with 2 granddaughters, Kaylee Martinez and Jalen Stewart. These children filled his heart with so much love, happiness, and purpose. Manuel was known to be an exceptional husband, father, and grandfather. His love was truly unconditional. Manuel was a devout Catholic. He was a dedicated employee of the Georgia O'Keeffe Foundation for over 30 years. He served as a school board member for Jemez Mountain Schools. He loved sports, being outdoors, reading, and listening to Northern New Mexican Spanish music. So many lives were affected by the loss of life in these communities, and the communities are still reeling from it. Andrea Kite reflected the sentiment perfectly for all of the families in the community when she said, quote, "People have survived this kind of tragedy before, and my family will too. But surviving is not thriving." End quote.
Oh my God, I'm going to start crying.
I know. And that is the tragic story of Damien Herrera and his murder spree.
It's such a short window of time where so much damage was caused. We think about, abusive personality types and the years of damage that they cause. And then I think that's what's so interesting about these spree killers. There's this microcosm, this window of time, a 24 to 48 hour period where dozens of people are affected in the most traumatic ways. I can't help but say that it's interesting because I don't want to minimize the tragedy behind it, but that kind of concentrated evil, it's almost too much to bear.
It is. It is, and it's terrifying, I think, in a lot of ways, because when you look at a story like this, for a long time, he seemed like a happy, well-adjusted young man, and then suddenly something shifts in him, and it's just terrifying to think that could happen to anybody.
Right.
We try to distance ourselves, I think, from people who perpetrate these kinds of horrors, but the reality is anybody could be capable of this.
That's true. And I definitely want to, that's a really good point to make. And also I want to contribute that I don't want to convey the message to people that people with mental health issues are more likely to be violent. That is not the case.
Yeah.
People suffering from mental illness are actually more likely to become victims of violent crime. So I don't want people to assume, because we're talking about, this young man potentially being, who knows, schizophrenic. Right. I don't want people to then think that all schizophrenics are violent or capable of this kind of violence. Sure.
Well, I think that's a fair thing to say. Not every person is capable of this kind of violence, but I think that it does speak to a larger issue that I'm probably not qualified to talk about. It's just so tragic, and I just feel so strongly for the families that were left with this incredible loss after this whole thing. And I hope that they can find some peace.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And we're back. All right, Lydia, your turn to bum me out.
All right. Mutual bumming is happening. All right. I'm going to talk about the Chimayo Massacre. And this happened in the early 90s in Chimayo, New Mexico, which is northern New Mexico. And
it's just interesting that both of these are northern New Mexico cases.
Yeah. I mean, these are norteños. These are... if you know anything about the norteño communities, is that they're a lot of like kind of clannish families, homes in very rural areas where they will build homes around each other on very rural back roads, and that's where they live their whole lives. Is and they're there to support each other. You talk about like the history of the grandmother making tortillas and collecting piñons. Like that is a very much a norteño thing in norteño family clans. I
think it's interesting to look at that. Because New Mexico is such a huge state. Like, it is so big. And there's so many differences between the north and the central and the south parts of the state, even in the language, even
totally.
In the Spanish.
And the food.
The food is different. The Spanish that they speak, like the norteño Spanish is, in some parts, some of the oldest Spanish that is still spoken today from the 1400s and 1500s when all this stuff was happening and the Spaniards were moving in through New Mexico and colonizing and all that other stuff that I don't really want to get into. But it's just interesting to me that both of these happened in these communities, and they're small towns, tight-knit, small very communities.
Everybody literally knows everybody, and you're, related or connected.
Somehow.
Yes, somehow.
And a lot of these families have been there for centuries. Through land grants from the Spanish government, through land grants from the American government. So a lot of them have held on to this land for centuries and passed it on.
Mm-hmm. And they keep it within their family clan. And that's where you see a lot of the more common, like, conquistador names like Herrera, Torres, Chavez. Yeah. And there's a constant theme with true consequences stories, and that's domestic violence and access to weapons. So this is another case of domestic violence, guns, and at the root of its bloody legacy. So the location of these spree killings was Chimayo, New Mexico, and it's a cultural and religious village in Santa Fe County. It's famous for the church there, the Chimayo Catholic Church. It's been there for a very long time. It's also well known for people making yearly pilgrimages.
Isn't that the church where the sand or the dirt's supposed to heal you?
The soil is said to be inherently blessed, and it's divine and has curative and restorative abilities. I've been gifted Chimayo sand. It's deep red. It's really beautiful, and I don't know that it cures or has restorative abilities. It's just nice to have it, I guess.
Yeah.
So the center of this massacre, his name was Ricky Abeyta, and he was a carpenter by trade, and he was also known by his friends and family as being an incredibly skilled hunter. So his girlfriend, Ignacita Sandoval, knew a much darker side of Ricky. He was abusive, he was controlling. They had lived together for roughly 2 years, again in another similar situated area in rural northern New Mexico, where there's like a couple of maybe homes connected with each other on one dirt road. And that's where Ignacita lived with Ricky, and nearby Ricky's mother and sisters lived. So they had been together for roughly 2 years, and she had had enough. So days before the massacre, she went to the courts and was requesting an order of protection. And she cited that when she told Ricky that she was going to leave him, he shot at her probably several times, shot at her and her car.
Oh my God.
So with that story, the courts did grant her a restraining order. And with the support of her family, she had a goal of moving out and getting as far away from Ricky as possible. She additionally sought protection from police the day that she planned to make the big move out of the home that they shared.
So she's doing everything right.
Doing everything right.
Everything that you would expect somebody who's trying to get away from a situation like this. I think it's important to note that domestic violence and intimate partner violence situations become increasingly more dangerous when the victim tries to leave.
Yep.
And there's a exponential increase in the chance of them being physically hurt or even killed.
Yep. And you add weapons to the equation, and those are historically the most dangerous call-outs also for police is DV call-outs, because typically the abuser has access to a weapon and at that point isn't afraid to use it, not only for the victim but against police. So she had the support that she needed from her family. She got the order of protection from the courts, and she notified the police that she was going to be moving out. On January 26th, Ricky, the skilled hunter, turned his sights on human prey, and he decided that Ignacia was not going to leave him. What happened on that day has two very different versions of events, depending on who you ask. So there's the state of New Mexico's version of events when they prosecuted Ricky, and then there's Ricky's version of events that he demonstrated to the court.
I'm going to just go out on a limb and say I'm probably going to believe the state.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah. So with the restraining order and the support of her 14-year-old son, Eloy, her 19-year-old daughter, Mary Ellen's 21-year-old boyfriend, Macario, their 6-month-old son, Justin, and Ignacia's 16-year-old sister, Selena, they all focused on getting her out of that home on January 26th.
Again, doing everything right. She's surrounding herself with people to help her so she doesn't have to take too long getting all her stuff out of that house. She's got an army of people to help protect her.
Exactly. So also on that day, Ignacia's 25-year-old sister Cheryl was also involved in helping with the move. And Ignacia also hired Peter Martinez. He was a neighbor in the community in Chimayo, and he agreed to help with loading the U-Haul of her belongings. Ignacia was understandably very worried that Ricky was going to become violent during the move, so she requested support from police. Sheriff Martinez agreed to go, and he also needed to serve the restraining order on Ricky, and he arrived at the property to ensure that the move out didn't become violent. So that morning, Ricky left the property, he locked up the house, and then he locked the gate leading to the road that leads to the house, and that's also very common here in New Mexico. You have these long stretches of roads where all you see is this locked gate, and it's only if you get beyond that gate and you go further down the road do you see the actual housing. So things are very, not completely cut off and isolated, but it's very rural. That's the only way that I can explain it.
Yeah, it's hard to even call it rural because I think it's even beyond that. If you look at rural places in Texas, you're going to see a lot of stuff on the road on the way. And this is you probably won't see anything for 20, 30 miles sometimes.
Totally, yeah. Maybe a mile marker, and that's how you tell people, you go on mile marker, whatever.
Yeah.
So the gate's locked, and Ignacia's son, Eloy, cut the locks to the gate, and Deputy Martinez arrived around the same time and served the restraining order on Ricky's family, being his mom and his two sisters, since Ricky wasn't there. And Sheriff Martinez also gave Ignacia permission to enter the home that she shared with Ricky to start packing. So Ricky's mother, Mrs. Abeyta, lived next door with Ricky and his two sisters, Dora and Sandra. Mrs. Abeyta and Dora were at the scene at various times during the day, and Sandra joined the group after she got home from work on Saturday afternoon, and her boyfriend Lawrence also joined the area after he got home from work. When Ignacia first arrived at the home, Ricky's mother and sister Dora, they tried to prevent her from getting access to the property. They basically told police that she was going to steal all of his stuff. And Sheriff Martinez presented them with the court order and was basically hey, just let her do what she's got to do so we can get out of here. So I think at that point, Ricky's mom and his sister Dora kind of backed off and the moving started to happen. So Sheriff Martinez was monitoring the move for some time, and Ricky was nowhere in sight. And a state police officer named Officer Huber came by to also provide support. However, it seemed like everything was under control. Things were moving along smoothly. And so Officer Huber left. And then Sheriff Martinez got a call out on another matter. I think it was a stolen vehicle or something. And so he thought, hey, everything's going okay here. They've seen me. I've shown up. Nobody's acting a fool. I'll go ahead and handle these other issues.
I don't like this.
So Ricky told the courts that he returned to his mother's home after work and was totally unaware that this move out was happening. He says he only became aware that they were moving Ignacita's belongings out is when he went to the home from his mom's to his home to go and put away some paint that he had bought. And he sees Ignacita packing and loading a U-Haul. And he alleges that Ignacita was taking his personal items. So Ricky told authorities that Eloy, Ignacita's little son, well, he's like 13 at the time, but still a child, that Eloy had threatened him, and they had had some sort of scuffle, and Eloy had cut Ricky's hand with a knife. And then he said that Eloy also had a gun, and that Macario had also threatened his life verbally. And he also alleged that he was worried that Ignacita was going to steal his guns, and that's why he had to have his guns with him, which doesn't make sense to me. Prosecutors believe that he already had a loaded shotgun and a loaded revolver on his person. So that version of events doesn't make sense, that he thinks Ignacita is going to steal his guns, unless he had other guns in the home, maybe. I don't know.
I can almost guarantee you, I mean, maybe not because I wasn't there, but I bet you that when the mom and the sister backed off, they went and called him at work and told him what was happening. And then he already knew. Oh,
maybe. Yeah. Entirely possible. Yeah. So Ricky also told the courts that he saw his physical belongings being loaded into the U-Haul, which I guess he felt was a justification for violence. So the state argued that Ricky went home after work with a loaded shotgun and a revolver, and he immediately had a confrontation with Eloy, Ignacita's 14-year-old son. And then Ricky shot Eloy in the shoulder.
Oh, my God.
And then he shot Macario, so essentially Ignacita's son-in-law, in the back. Ricky told the courts that he shot Eloy in self-defense when he claims that he saw Eloy pointing a gun at him.
Okay, so was it a knife? Was it a gun?
Right, yeah. Ricky says that Eloy and he had some sort of scuffle. Eloy goes back to the car or the cab of the U-Haul truck and gets a gun. And that he also claims that he's been also threatened by Macario. So Mary Ellen, Ignacita's daughter, hears the gunshots. She grabs her six-month-old baby and runs out of the house seeking safety. And Ricky shoots her in the head and shoots the baby in the head, killing them immediately.
Oh, my God.
So Ricky's version of events is that somebody hit him in the head during the scuffle with Eloy. And that caused his rifle to slip, accidentally discharging, thus shooting Mary Ellen and her baby. He says that he was hit in the head again, and when he turned around to see it, he then dropped his revolver, causing that to accidentally discharge.
I don't believe any of this.
Thus killing the baby. And the state was unable to discern, probably because obviously babies are tiny, and I can't imagine what the medical examination would even look like when you're trying to piece together the ballistics of this. They're pretty certain, they know obviously that the baby was shot in the head, but they couldn't discern whether or not it was the rifle or the revolver. And I don't know why that would be. Maybe because babies are so tiny. I don't know. The state then said that after killing Mary Ellen and her baby and Macario, and then injuring Eloy, because at this time Eloy has a shoulder injury from a gunshot wound. Macario's dead. He's been shot in the back. Mary Ellen is dead. She's been shot in the head. And her 6-month-old baby is dead. And he's been shot in the head.
It's just a nightmare.
It's so gruesome. It's like a horror movie.
And I can't even imagine being that family member trying to help your loved one get out of this abusive relationship, and then you get caught in this whole...
Right. Literally caught in the gunfire. So according to state prosecutors, Ricky entered the home where Ignacita and Cheryl were packing, and he yelled that they would pay. And he shot Cheryl in the back of the head as she knelt on the floor. They also alleged that Ricky made Cheryl plead for her life before shooting her, which would explain why she was in a kneeling position when she was apparently shot. Then Ricky shot Ignacita twice, and first hitting her finger, severing a tip of her finger, and then shooting her in the face. And it's possible that that finger was like a defensive wound. They also discovered that she had been struck in the back of the head at least twice, and they think maybe that was like the butt of the revolver. So Ricky's version of events was that inside the home, he claimed that he entered the house to see who had struck him in the back of the head. And he claimed he saw Cheryl packing and that he sensed trouble, and that he allegedly grabbed Cheryl, spun her around to confront her, at which somehow Ignacio had his revolver pointing at him. And he claimed that Ignacio shot at him. But rather than shooting him, he says Ignacio shot her own sister in the head, Cheryl. Ricky said that he and Ignacio then struggled over the gun, and the gun went off again, with Ignacio's hand allegedly partially over the barrel of the gun, resulting in that finger injury. And that they continued to struggle for the gun, and that he pushed the barrel of the gun towards her, and then she caused the gun to discharge, shooting herself in the face.
I don't feel like any of that makes sense at all.
I mean, and what are the odds that all of these guns are accidentally being discharged? So it's like he's removing himself from the action of all of these murders. So again, it's very different from what the state's version was.
I think it's pretty normal too for these types of abusers to blame other people for what happens to them, to blame the victims for what they're doing. So
again, the state presented consistently that they believe that Ricky found Cheryl packing, forced her to beg for her life, and then shot her in the head. And then he pointed the gun at Ignacio, and she raised her hand in a self-defense motion and shot off a tip of her finger. Then at some point he might have struck her in the back of the head and then shot her in the face.
Oh my God.
So Deputy Martinez returned in the midst of this violence. And just as Deputy Martinez returned, Ricky was exiting the home. And as he was exiting, he saw Eloy was still alive. So he shoots Eloy again, this time in the groin. And in a matter of moments, Deputy Martinez starts getting out of his car. Ricky walks right up to him and shoots him point blank twice in the face.
Oh my God.
Ricky retreated to his mother's house, which was further up the hill from his home. And at that point, State Police Officer Huber arrived on scene, who had been there previously. And just as Huber was getting out of the car, Ricky, from the hilltop, being a skilled hunter, is able to shoot his rifle and shoot Huber in the head. I don't know what the distance was, but I would imagine that's still a really remarkable shot. And it kind of, to me, it kind of throws out that self-defense thing out the window, that he then shot the officers who were responding.
Yeah, you are not acting in self-defense if you're shooting police.
Right. And Officer Huber was found with his radio still in hand, getting ready to call in the officer down, and he was killed instantly. So after these slaughters, Ricky disappeared into the mountains behind his mother's home, and a manhunt ensued that night. The next day, apparently Ricky went to a brother-in-law's house, knocked on the door, and basically said, "I need to turn myself in." His brother-in-law said that Ricky didn't say anything other than, "I need to go turn myself in," that they didn't talk about anything else. And that Ricky was apparently really quiet too. Whenever he did turn himself in, he didn't say much to investigators. He was arraigned the following Monday along with his sisters Dora and Sandra. And Dora was actually charged with attempted murder, and Sandra was charged with aggravated battery. I couldn't find in my research why they were charged with those things, other than Dora had been outside, or may have been outside, when Ricky first shot Eloy. And I couldn't see why Sandra was charged with aggravated battery. And I couldn't find whether or not they had been convicted.
This is just a terrible story. It's like the worst nightmare.
Eloy, Ignacita's son, and Selena, Ignacita's little sister, were the only survivors. Miraculously, Eloy survived, getting shot in the groin and in the shoulder. And during Ricky's trial, Ricky claimed self-defense in the slaughters. He said that this was nothing like premeditated. He was just defending himself. And there is a lot of interesting discussion about his claim of self-defense and the state pushing back on what those claim is. And you kind of touched on that with your story too, where the young man said that this was all self-defense, and the state's basically saying, like, no, that's not what self-defense is. And so obviously a jury didn't buy what he was selling, and they convicted Ricky, and he was sentenced to 146 years in prison. He is still in prison. I'm pretty sure he's here in the state of New Mexico Department of Corrections. I don't know what he's done, with his life since that information is pretty limited. It is just pretty remarkable that he was very adamant that he did nothing wrong.
Tragic story that, as somebody who has survived domestic violence and child abuse and all that, it's like my worst nightmare,
right.
Honestly. And I'm glad that he was arrested. I'm glad that he was prosecuted, but I don't know what the answer is for these types of situations, because you look at it, it reminds me a lot of the Girlie Chu Hasenkopf case that we covered, where the victim is doing everything right, everything that they're supposed to do, everything that the system is set up for, and it's still not enough to keep her alive or keep her family alive. Like, it's just, I don't even have words.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to like the purely concentrated evil. I mean, he was adamant that nobody was going to get out of there alive. And an entire family, other than Ignacita's son and her little sister, the entire family wiped out.
I'm glad he's locked away. I'm glad he can't hurt anybody else. But I hope that the family that did survive is finding some peace somehow.
I don't know what happened to Eloy. New Mexico is a small community, big state, but small community. Maybe if anyone knows how he's doing, if he's still with us. And I am genuinely curious because I couldn't find any trace of him online.
Yeah, he's probably not wanting to be out of the public eye. My God. Okay, well, these were two very, very tragic stories. I think they highlight a lot of the themes that we've been talking about on this show for the last couple of years. Mental health, the importance of mental health and access to resources, as well as domestic violence and the potential horrors that can come from that. I don't really know a good way to close this out other than thanks for listening and stay safe, New Mexico. Thanks for listening to True Consequences. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at True Consequences Pod, and on Twitter at TrueConsPod. True Consequences is listener supported. If you'd like to support this one-man show, please go to patreon.com/TrueConsequences. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.
Bundle your home and auto with Farmers and you could save up to 20%. 1 + 1 = 20. It's bundle math. Get a quote at farmers.com.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
Not available in every state. Only available with select Farmers branded policies subject to terms and conditions, underwritten by Farmers Truck or Fire Insurance Exchanges or affiliate.
Albuquerque and Route 66. They go way back. A lot of people drove through here hoping for a better life. Now, the Route 66 God Loves You Tour is bringing hope to Albuquerque, featuring artists like the Newsboys and Marcos Witt, and a message from Franklin Graham.
Remember this, God loves you.
The Route 66 God Loves You Tour, coming to Expo, New Mexico, Tuesday, September 28th. Learn more at godlovesyoutour.com.